What I'd like to do now is take you through a picture show, a virtual walkthrough of a building. What we typically see, what we'd suggest you look at as you wander around your buildings and document some things, observe and measure, and talk to people. So while the CO2 is building up in the rooms, we wanted to look at some of these other places in the building. We don't want to go to a classroom at 8:30 in the morning and expect to find very much CO2. We need the students and the staff to be breathing. Let that CO2 build up to where it's going to reach a reasonable number, and then we'll go to those classrooms with our meter. But we're going to look at locker rooms, shops, tunnels, art rooms, HVAC equipment, filters. Do that while people are breathing and giving us a good sample. Start outside. What's important to know is what's outside gets inside. So inside air is outdoor plus. So it's only going to be as fresh as your neighbors are going to allow you to be. If you're next to a freeway or a dairy farm, that's one of your challenges. So we look around the building, we look for nearby sources from the neighborhood. We also look for good drainage, so water's not running down and maybe getting into the building from beneath. We look for plants that might produce pollens or other allergens. We look for sidewalks and landscaping that is going to maybe help keep the school clean. If the kids are walking across a mud puddle, guess where the dirt's going to go? It's going to be that much more difficult to keep that school clean. We look low. We look high. What do we see? Challenges, right? So we just make a note of this. It's not a problem unless it's a problem. Here we see sandbags stacked up around a building. There's a clue. Is that a problem? Maybe they work. Maybe this is a fix until they can get a bond issue passed to do a permanent solution. You know, you don't want to jump to conclusions, but it's worth asking questions, it's worth investigating. The thing about mold, and mold is in the news, is that all you have to do is add water, and you're going to get mold. So we want to keep our buildings dry. Moisture in buildings, you're going to get mold growth, you're going to get structural or cosmetic damage, which is going to cost you money, and you can get occupants that are pretty concerned. Is it moldy? Well, if you've got moisture, it begs the question. So we want to eliminate the question mark in people's heads. Look for good drainage, adequate drainage. We see some pretty silly things that where the water's going. We need to manage the water. It shouldn't be that difficult. We know that concrete, bricks, they're just rigid sponges. Moisture can work its way through and you might have a problem. So we make a note of this. Here's an irrigation system that's defeating the roof overhang. An architect, a contractor, the builder, put a nice overhang on this building to shed the water, and then you spray it with an irrigation system. Maybe that's not the best approach. You make a note of it. Here we see a occluded drain pipe. Well, you see there's some seams there that water could work its way in. And we make a note of that on our floor plan, so when we go inside, we can make sure we check that particular classroom. Here's another drainage problem. Again, make a note of it so you know what to look for when you go inside the building. This is in snow country. You can see that roof sheds the snow, which is not a bad thing. But what's on the inside? Well, when you go inside, you find that indeed moisture has worked its way through and you've got a problem. Is there lead paint? How old is that building? Was lead paint used when it was constructed or painted? Here's an air intake next to the dumpsters. Something that somebody needs to be alerted to. Air intakes where the buses park and idle. Air intake next to the exhaust. Are we getting fresh air? You thought you exhausted that out, but it's coming right back in. We find a plugged intake screen. Not much fresh air is coming in, although the fan's running. We go up on the roof and we look at the air handling equipment. We look for moisture that's accumulated up there. We get an idea of what the mechanical equipment does on that rooftop. You don't have to be a mechanical engineer or learn everything about the equipment, but at least you ask the questions. Why is this one running and that one isn't? You make some inquiries about what's going on. Tell me about this, tell me about that. Just look around. Try and understand the building. Does it look appropriate? Something look like it might need some attention? It's worth asking. It's worth getting a good answer. You look for toilet vents. Is this right next to an air intake? Might be. We see all kinds of crazy things, but you don't know till you look. Combustion byproducts. A lot of the schools have natural gas, fuel oil, diesel, and some of those combustion products can get into the air intake. You can see that these flues aren't very far from that air intake. So we could be getting some combustion products into that building, and we know that carbon monoxide is odorless, colorless, tasteless. You don't know till you measure. We look in the attics. Here's an accumulation of bat guano over a third grade classroom. It's probably a good thing we discovered it before it caved in, which might have made the press. So it's worth looking high and low, inside and out. And we try and look every place, because typically it's the places that you don't think about going on a routine basis that we find the most interesting things. And again, this is, things change. And if you don't monitor, you don't know. You don't have a warning system. We look in the attic and we might find buckets and other things that are used to temporarily collect water. Is it a problem? If the bucket's big enough, maybe that works just fine. You just don't want to forget about it and let it overflow. We look in crawl spaces and tunnels, and we see that air can enter your school through unplanned pathways. Our buildings are full of holes. All of them have these holes behind the walls or in different cavities, and you don't, unless you check, you don't know which way the air is moving through this building that is actually looks like Swiss cheese behind the walls and behind the doors. So we check the airflow, and we know that warm air rises. So as air rises through your building, it actually creates a slight suction down low. So typically what's under the building gets into the building. So we find a portable sitting in a low spot. What do you think? You think air rises? This building might be damp. It might have some odors. It might have some contaminants from that crawl space. We see disconnected ducts in a crawl space. Now we've got a perfect delivery system for the air. Typically people have used duct tape in the past, and it's got a life of about 6 months when you put it on a duct. So we want to see a permanent sealed system so we don't have unplanned airflows. We look for site drainage. Here's a crawl space. You suppose this damp, moist air can get into the school? Yeah, we've got holes in our building. Here's a pathway, a hatch. So we look around those to see if air is actually entering that school. We don't just look there, we go down. We look, we get dirty. We find that this is a damp crawl space with some abandoned pipes. Not a place you'd want to spend much time. Is it a problem? You don't know till you look. You don't know. We just check it out. This is a school where they had a dirt-floored crawl space with carpet. It was also an abandoned target practice range for the ROTC. So there was lead and obviously mold and bacteria and things in this crawl space or this cellar which could get into the building. It was entering through a door. This is a tunnel. This is an air duct. This is the air delivery system. You'd hope that that was filtered or otherwise cleaned up. This is another air tunnel. This is your duct system for this particular school. And another one. Again, you look high and low. This duct actually had asbestos lining, and it was in the part of the state with a lot of radon. So we were delivering asbestos fibers and radon at the same time. We look at these tunnels, and oftentimes there's steam pipes or hot water pipes in there that can have leaky valves, and we see a lot of moisture. So we want to keep the moisture out from the occupied zones. When Dave and I do these walkthroughs, we draw straws to see who gets the dirtiest. You want to be careful of confined spaces when you start going around in these zones, and make sure you wear personal protection.